Imagine walking through a dense forest and stumbling upon a human footprint. But it's not just any footprint. It's over 2 feet long, carved deep into solid rock, as if someone or something far larger than any person alive today once roamed this earth. Now imagine that this isn't just one isolated mystery. Across continents, from ancient texts to burial sites, there are whispers of giants, beings of immense size who once walked among us. Were they real? Did giant humans actually exist? Or are these just myths spun from imagination? What if I told you that the story of human evolution is far stranger and more shocking than we've been led to believe? Stick around, because what you're about to discover might change everything you thought you knew about our ancestors. Let's start with something fascinating. If you were to open the sacred texts, folklore, and oral histories of civilizations from around the world, cultures that never had contact with each other, you'd find something bizarre. They all talk about giants, not just tall people, but beings of extraordinary, almost unimaginable size. Giants who shaped mountains, battled gods, and ruled over ancient lands before vanishing into legend. Think about it. How is it possible that a tribe in the Amazon rainforest, a civilization in ancient Mesopotamia, and Norse warriors in Scandinavia all independently came up with stories of towering humanoid beings? Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe there's something deeper going on here, something we've overlooked in our rush to label these tales as pure mythology. The more you dig into these stories, the more patterns emerge. These weren't just campfire tales meant to scare children or explain natural phenomena. In many cases, these giants were described with striking detail: how they lived, what they built, and even how they interacted with regular-sized humans. Some accounts describe them as wise and benevolent. Others paint them as violent conquerors, feared and eventually destroyed by gods or floods. But here's the kicker. Many of these cultures treated these stories not as fiction, but as history. They weren't writing fantasy novels. They were documenting their understanding of the past. So the question becomes, if these stories aren't true, why do they exist in such consistent form across the globe? And if they are true, even partially, what does that mean for our understanding of human history? Let's explore some of these accounts and see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Let's get specific. The Bible, the book of Genesis, mentions the Nephilim, mysterious giants described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These beings were said to be mighty warriors, people of renown who existed before the Great Flood. Later, in the book of Numbers, Israelite spies report seeing giants in the land of Canaan, describing themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. The giant Goliath, famously defeated by David, stood over 9 feet tall according to ancient texts. These weren't metaphors. They were described as literal beings. Now travel across the Mediterranean to ancient Greece. The Greeks spoke of the Titans, primordial giants who ruled the cosmos before the Olympian gods overthrew them. According to myth, these beings were so massive they could hurl mountains and reshape the earth itself. Then there were the Gigantes, another race of giants born from Gaia, who waged war against Zeus and the gods. Greek historians like Pausanias even wrote about giant bones being unearthed in their time, which they believed belonged to these legendary beings. Head west to the Americas, and the pattern continues. Native American tribes from coast to coast tell stories of giant ancestors. The Paiute people of Nevada speak of the Siteka, red-haired giants who lived in caves and were eventually driven out or destroyed. The Choctaw have legends of the Nahulo, a race of tall, pale-skinned giants. Mound-building cultures left behind earthworks so massive that early European settlers believed only giants could have constructed them. These aren't isolated fairy tales. They're deeply embedded in cultural memory, passed down through generations with reverence and conviction. Whether in the Middle East, Europe, or the Americas, the theme is the same. Giants once walked the earth. So why do these stories exist? Skeptics offer a few explanations. One theory is that ancient people discovered fossils of large prehistoric animals, mammoths, giant ground sloths, dinosaurs, and lacking modern paleontology, interpreted these bones as belonging to giant humans. Another idea is that these legends served a social or religious purpose, embodying the forces of chaos, strength, or divine punishment in a way people could understand. But here's where it gets interesting. Some researchers argue that these myths might have a kernel of truth. Not that 10-foot-tall humans roamed the earth in droves, but that unusually large individuals, whether due to genetic mutations, isolated populations, or environmental factors, existed and left such a profound impression that their memory was passed down and exaggerated over time. After all, conditions like gigantism do exist today. Imagine how a person 7 or 8 feet tall might have been perceived thousands of years ago in a world where the average height was much shorter. There's also the possibility that these stories preserve real historical encounters, perhaps with other hominin species. Neanderthals were robust and powerfully built. Denisovans, another ancient human cousin, may have been larger than modern humans. Could encounters with these others have seeded the giant legends? Or maybe the truth is simpler. Humans are natural storytellers, and giants represent the ultimate other, powerful, mysterious, and just beyond our grasp. They symbolize our fears, our past, and the idea that the world was once wilder, stranger, and more dangerous than it is now. Whether rooted in reality or pure imagination, these legends have endured because they speak to something fundamental in us, the belief that the world holds secrets we've yet to fully uncover. All right, let's get scientific for a moment. Could giant humans actually have existed? To answer that, we need to understand how human growth works and what happens when it goes wrong. Or depending on your perspective, when it goes very, very right. Human height is controlled by a complex interplay of genetics, nutrition, and hormones. Growth hormone, produced by the pituitary gland, is the key player. Under normal circumstances, this hormone is carefully regulated. But sometimes things go haywire. When the pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone during childhood, a condition called gigantism occurs. People with gigantism can grow to extraordinary heights, 8, even 9 feet tall. Robert Wadlow, the tallest person ever recorded, stood at 8 feet 11 inches before his death in 1940. He wasn't a myth. He was real, but here's the catch. Gigantism comes with severe health complications. The human skeleton and cardiovascular system aren't designed to support that much mass. Joint problems, heart strain, and shortened lifespans are common. Robert Wadlow died at just 22 years old, so while individuals of extreme height can and do exist, they face significant biological disadvantages. Now, could entire populations of giant humans have existed in prehistory? The answer gets tricky. Evolution favors traits that improve survival and reproduction. Extreme height, with all its health drawbacks, wouldn't be advantageous in most environments. You'd need more food, have trouble finding shelter, and face mobility issues. Natural selection would likely weed out such traits over time. However, and this is important, there are examples in nature where gigantism has thrived. Island gigantism, for instance, occurs when species isolated on islands evolve to larger sizes, due to lack of predators and abundant resources. Could something similar have happened with ancient human populations under the right conditions? It's theoretically possible, though we'd need evidence. And that's where things get controversial. Now we enter the murky waters of alleged evidence. Over the years, countless reports have surfaced claiming the discovery of giant human skeletons, bones far larger than any modern human. Newspaper articles from the 1800s and early 1900s are filled with sensational headlines. Giant skeleton found in Ohio mound, or 7-foot-tall remains unearthed in California. Some of these reports came from seemingly credible sources, including the Smithsonian Institution. So, where are these bones now? That's the million-dollar question. Conspiracy theorists claim they've been hidden or destroyed by institutions trying to suppress evidence that contradicts mainstream evolutionary theory. Skeptics counter that these reports were either hoaxes, misidentifications, or exaggerations. Remember, this was an era of sensationalist journalism and traveling sideshow attractions. A giant skeleton could easily have been constructed from animal bones or simply fabricated for attention. But let's be fair, some findings are harder to dismiss. The 1950s, enormous stone tools were discovered in Morocco, seemingly designed for hands much larger than modern humans possess. In the Philippines, fossils of Homo luzonensis, a small-bodied hominin, were found, proving that human ancestors came in wildly different sizes. And then there's Gigantopithecus, an actual giant ape that stood up to 10 feet tall and lived alongside early humans in Asia. Its bones have been found and verified. Here's the thing: the fossil record is incomplete. We're constantly discovering new hominin species that challenge what we thought we knew. Denisovans were only identified in 2010. Who's to say there weren't other human cousins? Perhaps larger ones that we simply haven't found yet, or that their remains were misidentified or lost to time. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but it's also not proof of giants. So why does mainstream science overwhelmingly reject the idea of giant humans? It comes down to evidence, or rather, the lack thereof. Science operates on a principle. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And when it comes to giant humans, the evidence just isn't there. Yes, there are anecdotal reports and old newspaper clippings. But anecdotes aren't data. None of these alleged giant skeletons have been properly documented, measured, photographed, or preserved in a way that can be studied and verified. No peer-reviewed papers. No DNA analysis. No museum specimens available for independent examination. In the world of science, that's a red flag. Furthermore, many of the giant bones that were examined turned out to be from Ice Age megafauna, mastodons, giant ground sloths, cave bears. To someone untrained in anatomy, a mastodon femur could easily be mistaken for a giant human bone. Mix in a bit of wishful thinking, some cultural bias, and maybe a dose of deliberate deception, and you've got a giant skeleton story. Then there's the biological argument we touched on earlier. Evolution doesn't favor gigantism in humans. Our ancestors survived by being adaptable, intelligent, and efficient, not enormous. A 9-foot-tall human in the Paleolithic would have been at a severe disadvantage, requiring far more calories in an environment where food was scarce and unpredictable. That said, science isn't about rigid dogma. It's about following the evidence wherever it leads. If tomorrow, a verifiable giant human skeleton were discovered, properly dated and analyzed, the scientific community would have to adjust its understanding. But until that day comes, the consensus remains. While unusually tall individuals have always existed, a distinct race or species of giant humans is not supported by credible evidence. The legends, as captivating as they are, remain just that, legends. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the giant. Many of the most famous proofs of giant humans have turned out to be elaborate hoaxes, and some of them were shockingly convincing at the time. Take the Cardiff Giant, for example. In 1869, workers digging a well in New York unearthed what appeared to be a petrified giant human, over 10 feet tall. It caused a sensation. Thousands paid to see it. Newspapers declared it proof of the biblical giants. There was just one problem. It was completely fake. A man named George Hull had commissioned the sculpture as a deliberate hoax to mock biblical literalists. Yet even after it was exposed, people continued to believe. Fast forward to the internet age, and the hoaxes have only gotten more sophisticated. Photoshopped images of archaeologists standing next to enormous skeletons circulate widely on social media, racking up millions of shares. Some of these images originated from digital art contests, literally created as fiction, but are now presented as fact. The problem is, a convincing fake image spreads faster than the debunking ever will. Then there are the misidentifications. In the 1800s, many so-called giant bones were later identified as belonging to mastodons, mammoths, or other Ice Age megafauna. To an untrained eye, a mastodon's femur looks remarkably humanoid. Add a dash of sensationalism from a newspaper editor looking for sales, and suddenly you've got proof of giants. Even well-meaning explorers and archaeologists sometimes misinterpreted what they found. Elongated skulls, for instance, have been found in various ancient cultures, but these were the result of intentional cranial deformation, a cultural practice, not evidence of a different species. Context matters, and without rigorous scientific analysis, it's incredibly easy to see what we want to see, rather than what's actually there. So if the evidence doesn't hold up, why are we still so captivated by the idea of giants? The answer lies deep in human psychology and culture. Giants represent something primal, something that taps into our collective imagination in ways few other myths do. First, there's the fear factor. Giants embody raw, overwhelming power, something beyond our control. In ancient times, when humans were far more vulnerable to the forces of nature, the idea of beings larger and stronger than us made sense. They were a way to personify danger, chaos, and the unknown. Telling stories about giants was a way to process fear and assert that even the mightiest could be defeated, usually through cleverness or divine intervention. But giants also represent wonder. They remind us of a time when the world felt bigger, stranger, and less mapped out. Today, we've explored nearly every corner of the planet. Satellites can photograph your backyard. We've sequenced the human genome. In some ways, the mystery is gone. Giants offer an escape from that, a tantalizing what-if that suggests history might still hold secrets. There's also a deeper, almost nostalgic element. The idea that giants once existed implies that the past was more epic, more mythic than our present. It feeds into a narrative that humanity has somehow diminished over time, that our ancestors witnessed wonders we can only dream of. It's the same impulse that drives fascination with Atlantis, ancient aliens, or lost civilizations. And let's be honest, giants are just plain cool. They make for great stories, movies, and viral content. In an age of information overload, a bold claim like scientists are hiding evidence of giants cuts through the noise. It's controversial, conspiratorial, and exciting. Truth becomes secondary to the thrill of belief. And that, perhaps more than anything, explains why the legend endures. Here's the real twist. While giant humans, as depicted in legends, likely never existed, the story of human evolution is still far stranger and more diverse than most people realize. We weren't alone on this planet. For much of our history, multiple species of humans coexisted, and they came in wildly different shapes and sizes. Homo floresiensis, discovered in Indonesia, stood just over 3 feet tall, a hobbit human that lived as recently as 50,000 years ago. Homo naledi had a bizarre mix of primitive and modern features. Denisovans, known mostly from DNA and a few fragments, were robust and may have been larger than modern humans. Neanderthals were shorter but incredibly muscular, built like linebackers. And then there's us, Homo sapiens, who interbred with several of these species, carrying their genes to this day. So while we don't have evidence of 9-foot-tall giants, the truth is almost as remarkable. Our ancestors lived in a world populated by different kinds of humans, some strange and unfamiliar by today's standards. Encounters with these others may well have inspired the giant legends, especially if exaggerated over generations of oral storytelling. The final verdict? Giant humans, as described in mythology, towering beings who built megaliths and battled gods, almost certainly didn't exist in the way the legends claim. The evidence simply isn't there, but the stories themselves are real, and they reveal something important about us: our need to explain the unexplainable, to make sense of the bones and ruins left by the past, and to believe that the world once held wonders greater than ourselves. Maybe that's the real shocking truth. It's not that giants walked the earth, it's that we've always needed to believe they did. So did giant humans exist? The answer is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. While there's no credible scientific evidence supporting the existence of a race of towering giants, as described in ancient myths, the stories themselves are windows into how our ancestors understood their world. They found massive bones and constructed narratives. They met other human species and remembered them as others. They faced the unknown and gave it a face, often a very large one. The real story of human evolution is filled with diversity, mystery, and discovery. We're still finding new species, rewriting timelines, and uncovering secrets buried for millennia. Maybe one day we'll find something that challenges everything we thought we knew. Until then, the giants live on, not in the ground, but in our imaginations, reminding us that the past is never quite as simple as it seems. What do you think? Do you believe there's more to the story, or are giants purely the stuff of legend? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed diving into this mystery with me, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are plenty more shocking truths about history, science, and the human story waiting to be explored. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.